The humidity of the tunnels beneath the Temple Mount carries a weight that does not come from the stones, but from a presence that seems to pulse in the darkness like a physical warning. Wait to see the glow of pure gold reflected in the real sweat of priests who felt the biological weight of holiness crushing their shoulders. Stay to watch and discover why Uzzah's touch was not an accident, but the collapse of a man who tried to domesticate what is indomable. Do not miss the investigation into where the Ark is hidden today and how rescuing respect for boundaries is the only key to filling the void in your life. This is The Bible Teaches. The darkness that fills the tunnels beneath the Temple Mount possesses a density that torchlight cannot fully dissipate, emitting a scent of damp limestone and centuries of accumulated silence that seems to weigh upon the shoulders of those who dare to descend. For a long time, the pattern of our search was focused on the surface, on worn maps and academic theories attempting to locate an object of gold and wood, as if it were merely a lost relic of a forgotten empire, a silent equilibrium that protected us from the radiation of a presence that cannot be tamed. Then the pattern broke when history revealed that this was not a lucky charm or a common weapon of war, but the receptacle of a divine voltage so pure that the simple touch of dirt-stained nails or unprepared hands resulted in an immediate and fatal biological interruption. I observed the glow of pure gold reflecting off the rough stone walls of a secret cavern, where the dust on the eyelashes of those observing the impossible shines like stars captured in a labyrinth of mystery. The environment here feels dangerous and real, a construction site of eternity where the earth-cracking noise comes not from machines, but from the invisible weight of a glory that demands total surrender before being understood. The mystery does not lie only in the geographical whereabouts of this acacia box, but in how the human mind manages to maintain sanity when confronted with evidence that there is an impassable limit between what is common and what is sacred. I feel the chill in my bones noting that the Ark was not a decorative piece, but a living document of a covenant written in fire, realizing that sacred terror is the only honest response for those who try to treat the Creator as a utilitarian amulet. Raw historical realism shows us imperfect teeth grinding in effort and real sweat trickling down the temples of priests who carried the fate of a nation upon their shoulders, knowing that a single false step could transform worship into a spiritual autopsy. This oscillation between the macro scale of the fate of kingdoms that fell trying to possess this secret and the microscopic gaze at the tremor of the hand of the one holding the torch creates the sensation of an epic documentary about our search for a power we cannot control. You may be feeling this same atmospheric pressure in your life today, realizing that your search for meaning always hits a void that no material conquest can fill, forcing your spirit to deal with a method of God that demands the rescue of lost respect. The central thesis of this centuries-old hunt is that the Ark of the Covenant is the direct mirror of our own modern disorientation, where we try to fill an infinite hole with finite things and find ourselves surprised when the result is the taste of ashes in the mouth. I see the metallic glow that never fades beneath the sands of Ethiopia or in the depths of the desert, proving that the sacred is not hidden from us, but protected by our own inability to deal with limits. The hidden why of Uzzah falling dead, while trying to steady the Ark, reveals a collective anxiety that cracks the cohesion of our spirit. The fear that there are rules we cannot bypass with our ego. The meaning here must be perceived before it is understood, for every detail of this object's construction was a coordinate of a vigilance that never sleeps, ensuring that your current isolation is merely the necessary laboratory for you to understand that God does not dwell in objects, but in the integrity of your surrender. This maximum dilation of the mystery forces us to hear the sound of the internal collapse of those who forgot, that true peace is only born after the ego is pulverized by the impact of a presence that demands exclusivity and absolute reverence. The movement of the new cart transporting God's gold did not possess the stability of the mountains of Jerusalem, but the dangerous swaying of an enthusiasm that forgot the instruction in order to embrace convenience. I smell the dust and feel the heat of the blistering sun over the road of Chidon, observing Uzzah walking beside the ark with a confidence bordering on negligence, while real sweat trickles down his face on a day that should have been one of celebration, but instead became a spiritual autopsy of self-sufficiency. Raw historical realism shows us the exact moment the oxen stumbled, a simple physical failure that cracks our illusion of control over the divine, forcing human biology to react before the spirit can process the consequence. I see Uzzah's hand reach out in a protective reflex, dirt-stained nails seeking firmness on the pure gold that was not meant to be touched by unconsecrated hands, a small gesture that ignored millennia of limits established by the Creator himself. The environment here feels dangerous and real, saturated by an invisible static that makes the hair on one's arms stand up seconds before the shock, where the earth-cracking noise of the animal's fall is replaced by the deafening silence of a divine interruption. Christian psychology applied to this instant collapse reveals that Uzzah did not die out of malice, but because he treated the sacred as something common, a thesis that excessive familiarity with God can become the tomb of our reverence. The mystery does not lie in the force of the blow that struck him down, but in the way the human mind convinces itself it can help God or steady his glory with the tools of our own anxiety. I perceive that the hidden why of this violent death is the need to restore the biographical limit between creature and creator, proving that respect is the only safety technology capable of keeping us alive before the real presence. The meaning must be perceived before it is understood. Uzzah treated the ark like a commodity that needed balancing, ignoring that the one who carries the ark is sustained by it and not the other way around. You may be experiencing this same biological exhaustion today, trying to carry the weight of your future and your family as if everything depended on your own arm. Feeling the chill in your bones as you realize your effort produces no peace, but only the taste of ashes of a life without due awe. The vision of micro and macro history places us before a King David, who, observing the fallen body of his friend, experiences the bankruptcy of his own spiritual marketing strategy, trading the music for a dread that cracks his ego. I see the tremor in the king's hand and the rough texture of the earth where he sits, feeling the biological weight of a guilt that no harp can alleviate, while the sun descending on the horizon casts long shadows over the mystery he tried to domesticate. The anatomy of this crisis reveals that the void you feel in your soul may be the trail of a life where the sacred was expelled to make room for utility, transforming your existence into a construction site of successes that do not nourish you. This sensory dilation of Uzzah's error forces us to confront our own irreverence, perceiving that God's "do not touch" is in reality a protective fence for our fragility. The result of this engineering of limits is the discovery that respect is not a prison, but the oxygen necessary so that God's presence does not consume us, but illuminates us with a glory the world cannot offer. The atmosphere that settled over Israel after Uzzah's collapse was not one of peace, but an atmospheric static of dread that cracks the silence of homes and causes the sleep of the righteous to be haunted by a golden glow that no one else dares to face. I observe David, the king who knew God's heart, now sitting in claustrophobic isolation, feeling the chill in his bones as one who realized his crown offers no protection against the radiation of a holiness he tried to manipulate.
Respect is not a
Raw historical realism places us before a construction site of interrupted hopes, where the real sweat on the monarch's hands reveals the tremor of one who discovered the ark is not a trophy, but a real presence demanding a spiritual autopsy of all our intentions. The environment here feels dangerous and real, saturated by the scent of damp earth and the taste of ashes from a feast that ended in a funeral, proving the hidden why of this distance is the need to recalibrate the soul for the biological weight of glory. I feel the pulse of this narrative shift, noticing the ark was left in the house of a foreigner, a man from Gath named Obed-Edom, whose dirt-stained nails now care for the object that the most powerful army on earth fears to touch. Christian psychology applied to this 3-month interval reveals that the fear distancing David from the ark is the disease of an ego that only accepts God when he is useful and predictable. A thesis that our biological exhaustion comes from fleeing what we should revere. The mystery does not lie in the sudden prosperity of Obed-Edom's house, but in how this man processed the information that the source of death for Uzzah was the source of life for the one who maintains respect and limits. I perceive that the hidden why of this blessing is the discovery that the sacred is not dangerous to the humble, but only to those who try to treat the eternal as a tool for status or a lucky charm. The meaning must be perceived before it is understood. Obed-Edom did not try to steady the ark. He simply allowed it to inhabit his space, transforming his common routine into sacred ground through a silent decision of honor. You may feel that God's presence is a weight that scares you today, leaving your spirit with the shiver of one who fears judgment. But understand that this high-pressure environment is the necessary laboratory for your real face to be cleansed of all irreverence. The vision of micro and macro history shows us that the fate of an entire nation was being decided in the silence of a living room on the outskirts of Jerusalem, where the glow of gold in the darkness tested the people's maturity. I see the rough texture of the stone where the ark rested, and the look of betrayal David cast toward the horizon, realizing his success without due awe was merely an access ramp to absolute loneliness. The anatomy of this waiting period reveals that emotional healing only begins when we stop seeing God as an amulet and start seeing him as the center demanding our absolute biological surrender. This oscillation between the macro scale of the kingdom's politics and the microscopic gaze at the dust on the eyelashes of Obed-Edom, who observed the glory up close without dying, creates the sensation of an epic documentary on surrender to mystery. The expected result of this engineering of limits is that your life, which today seems empty, will be filled by the discovery that respect is not a burden, but the only technology capable of sustaining us in the atmosphere of pure holiness. The atmosphere in Jerusalem changed when news of prosperity in Obed-Edom's house pierced through the stone walls, bringing a scent of hope that cracks the isolation of a king who once feared God himself. I observe David now abandoning the new cart and convenience methods to summon the Levites, whose dirt-stained nails and prepared shoulders reveal the technology of submission necessary to carry the real presence without suffering Uzzah's collapse. Raw historical realism places us before a precision-engineered organization, where the glow of the ark's gold reflects in the real sweat of men who tremble not from panic, but from a reverence, performing a spiritual autopsy of every step taken on sacred ground. The environment here feels dangerous and real, saturated by the percussive sound of 6 steps followed by a sacrifice, an earth-cracking noise establishing a new heart rhythm for a nation that rediscovered the importance of limits. I feel the pulse of this narrative shift, noticing the distance between man and glory is not filled by brute force, but by a sequence of silent decisions of honor, transforming the upward path into a laboratory of holiness. Christian psychology applied to this slow progress reveals that sacrifice every 6 steps is the thesis that our biological exhaustion only ends when we stop to recognize we are not the masters of the journey. The mystery does not lie in the blood of bulls spilled in the dust, but in how the human mind processes the information that access to the sacred demands a constant interruption of the ego to make room for gratitude. I perceive that the hidden why of this paused walk is the need to remove the bitumen of our modern haste so our real face can be illuminated by the light emanating from the mercy seat. The meaning must be perceived before it is understood. David was not merely moving an object, he was restoring his own identity through a ritual demanding the death of his vanity every few meters of progress. If this silence is finding a place in you, and if this journey of healing is bringing a lento to your invisible scars, leave your sign of support and join us on this journey so this word reaches more weary hearts. I invite you to seal this moment of reflection by writing in the comments, "Rescuing respect." By writing, you declare to your own spirit that the resistance against the sacred has ended and your healing has begun at the exact point where you accepted there are limits that cannot be ignored. The vision of micro and macro history places us before a king who now dances with all his might, stripping off his royal robes to wear the linen of humility, proving true authority is only born in the soil of total transparency. I see the rough texture of David's tunic and the dust on the eyelashes of a people observing, for the first time, that the ark is not a weapon of destruction, but the center of a joy the world cannot digest. The anatomy of this celebration reveals the void you feel in your soul is the trail of a life where you expelled the sacred to become your own king, transforming your existence into a construction site of solitary conquests. This oscillation between the macro scale of Israel's theological destiny and the microscopic gaze at the tremor in David's leg as he leaps before the glory creates the sensation of an epic documentary on liberation from fear. The result of this engineering of awe is the discovery that respect is not a heavy burden, but the only atmosphere where the real presence can dwell without our biological fragility collapsing under the weight of eternity. The atmosphere in Jerusalem reached a voltage of glory that seems to saturate the oxygen, where the glow of the Ark of the Covenant's gold is no longer a passive reflection, but a radiation exposing the anatomy of every human intention. I smell incense mixed with the real sweat of a crowd that rediscovered the earth-cracking noise, not through war, but through a joy that ignores the fences of royal etiquette. For a long time, the behavior pattern expected of a monarch was silent equilibrium and the maintenance of a porcelain mask protecting political prestige from the masses, an old normalcy treating the divine as a background adornment. Then the pattern broke when David, stripped of his robe of authority, decided his biology as a king was less important than his role as a worshipper, dancing with a tremor in his hands, revealing the total surrender of one who no longer fears being ridiculous before men. I observe Michal, Saul's daughter, watching through the window with a look of betrayal and a chill in her bones emanating not from God's presence, but from contempt for a surrender she cannot label. The environment here feels dangerous and real, a construction site of the soul where the thesis of human dignity collides with the absolute sovereignty of the crystal throne. Christian psychology applied to this confrontation of windows and streets reveals the void Michal feels is the trail of a soul that transformed faith into a status tool, a thesis that pride is the bitumen isolating the heart from the real presence. The mystery does not lie in the physical sterility that struck her, but in how the human mind convinces itself it can criticize the fire without being consumed by its own internal ice. I perceive the hidden why of her indignation is the desperate need to keep the sacred within well-behaved limits, preventing God's glory from rearranging the furniture of a life based on appearance. The meaning must be perceived before it is understood. The ark brought not only blessing to Obed-Edom, it brought the spiritual autopsy of a marriage based on protocols rather than the transparency of the spirit. You may be experiencing this same atmospheric pressure in your home today, feeling judged by those who share your table because you decided to rescue respect for something they treat as common, leaving your spirit with the chill of one walking alone in your search for truth. The vision of micro and macro history places us before the thesis that a kingdom's success depends not on the height of its walls, but on the depth of its submission to what is invisible and eternal. I see the rough texture of the linen David wears and the dust on the eyelashes of a queen who prefers the safe distance of the palace to the heat of sacred ground, proving the worst prison is the one we build with the bitumen of our own vanity. The anatomy of this conflict reveals your emotional healing only happens when you decide heaven's validation is more urgent than the applause of those watching your life through a window of judgment. This oscillation between the macro scale of a nation's theological identity and the microscopic gaze at Michal's imperfect tooth as she clenches her jaw in disapproval creates the sensation of an epic documentary on surrender. The result of this engineering of honor is that David enters his house to bless it, but finds only the taste of ashes of a religiosity that lost the silence necessary to hear its own heart. The atmosphere in the corridors of the first temple changed when the earth-cracking noise of foreign invasions began echoing against Jerusalem's walls, bringing a scent of oxidized metal and the taste of ashes of an empire seeing its decline on the horizon. I feel the chill in my bones, describing the moment the priests, with dirt-stained nails and the real sweat of urgency, decided the Ark of the Covenant could not become a trophy in the hands of pagan conquerors. For centuries, the safety pattern was the visibility of the Holy of Holies, a silent equilibrium where God's presence was the geographical and spiritual center of an entire nation. Then the pattern broke when the Ark vanished from biblical records, leaving behind only the rough texture of empty stone and a spiritual autopsy of a people who lost the object but could not erase the radiation of its memory. The environment here must feel dangerous and real, saturated by torchlight, casting flickering shadows in secret tunnels beneath the Temple Mount, where isolation engineering was used to hide eternity's greatest treasure from greedy eyes. Christian psychology applied to this mysterious disappearance reveals the void left by the Ark is the thesis that the real presence cannot be maintained by those who lost respect for the limits of the sacred. The mystery does not lie in the physical location, be it in Jerusalem's tunnels or Ethiopia's mountains, but in how the human mind processes the hidden why of God, allowing his earthly throne to become an archaeological ghost. I realize this concealment was the necessary isolation laboratory for man to stop worshipping the gold box and start seeking the holiness it represented, a painful transition between the visible and the eternal. The meaning must be perceived before it is understood. The Ark vanished, so God's law could be written no longer on hidden stone tablets, but on the damp and vulnerable soil of the human heart. You may feel God has hidden from you today, leaving your spirit with the dust on your eyelashes as you search for an answer that seems to have evaporated. But understand, this silence is the access ramp to a faith not dependent on physical evidence to survive. The vision of micro and macro history places us before a millennial cold case, where every archaeological excavation and conspiracy theory is but the tremor of humanity's hand, still trying to fill its infinite hole with finite relics. I see the texture of the limestone rock where the ark may have rested for the last time, and the look of betrayal of time erasing the trails of the ancients, proving the sacred is not something we possess, but something possessing us when we accept its terms. The anatomy of this absence reveals your feeling of biographical emptiness is the trail of a life treating the eternal as merely a historical curiosity, ignoring the glory voltage still demanding your respect. This oscillation between the fate of nations hunting the ark and the microscopic gaze at the ash of an extinguished torch in a forgotten cavern creates the sensation of an epic documentary on our eternal thirst for the divine. The result of this mystery engineering is the discovery that the Ark of the Covenant, though invisible to the eyes, continues performing a spiritual autopsy on every generation, forcing us to choose between the ego's noise and the earth-cracking silence of true worship. The physical absence of the Ark of the Covenant in modern excavations is not an error of history, but a divine strategy cracking our obsession with tactile evidence and forcing us to face the silence of a Holy of Holies now dwelling within the chest. I feel the chill in my bones noting humanity spends billions of dollars and decades of real sweat trying to locate a gold box in limestone caverns while ignoring the radiation of a presence demanding the ego's disintegration on the damp soil of daily life. Raw historical realism shows us the greatest danger of finding the Ark today would not be physical radiation or a lost weapon of war, but the immediate spiritual autopsy it would perform on a generation that lost the capacity to recognize limits and respect the sacred. The current environment must feel dangerous and real, saturated by the metallic scent of technology, trying to replace God, and the taste of ashes, of successes failing to fill the infinite hole left by a lack of reverence in our biology. For a long time, our safety pattern was based on what we could touch, measure, and control, a silent equilibrium, giving us the illusion we were masters of our own destiny. Then the pattern broke when we realized the Ark was not an amulet to give us victory, but the real presence inviting us to die to our vanity before giving us back life. Christian psychology applied to this archaeological void teaches your life feels hollow today, not because you lost something material, but because you treated what should be sacred as common, removing the fences protecting your sanity. The mystery does not lie in the location of Ethiopian tunnels or secrets under the dome of the rock, but in how you process the hidden why of having everything the world offers, yet still feeling the dust on the eyelashes of an internal desert. I perceive the search for the Ark is the thesis of every man trying to fill an eternal hunger with finite conquests, transforming collaboration with the divine into a silent competition where respect was the first victim. The meaning must be perceived before it is understood. The importance of rescuing limits in your relationships, your time, and your worship is the only technology capable of sustaining your emotional structure before the pressures of modern chaos. You may be holding the stones of your own failure now, feeling the tremor in the hands of one realizing your new cart of conveniences took you far from the center. But understand, this exhaustion environment is the maternity where your new authority is being gestated. The vision of micro and macro history places us before the fact that the Ark's disappearance was the spiritual surgery necessary for humanity to rediscover the most precious gold is that forged in the silence of obedience. I see the dirt-stained nails of those still searching on the ground for what God already breathed into the spirit, proving any project ignoring the real presence is destined to become a ruin covered in ashes and oblivion. The anatomy of this search reveals evil does not want only your defeat, but your complete moral disintegration through the banalization of the divine, transforming your excellence into a soulless status gear. This oscillation between the fate of civilizations trying to domesticate the sacred and the microscopic gaze at the sweat on your forehead facing the void creates the sensation of an epic documentary on your own liberation. The result of this limits engineering is the discovery the Ark of the Covenant is not lost. It just changed address, waiting for you to decide to clean the soil of your heart so the earth-cracking glory can finally find a place to dwell. The final image remaining from the search for the Ark of the Covenant is not that of a gold object locked in a cavern, but of a humanity that finally found the ground of its own fragility again, washed by the severe mercy of a god refusing to be an amulet. I observe the temple's silent ramps and Ethiopia's dusty roots, feeling the rough texture of the skin of those who learned, through loss and void, that a man's true height is measured not by what he possesses, but by the depth of his respect for the mystery governing us. Raw historical realism delivers us the living document of a civilization that became official proof no status structure can maintain its internal cohesion when the frequency of sacred connection is sacrificed on the altar of utility. The environment here must feel dangerous and real until the last second, saturated by the scent of damp earth, now reclaiming what the ego tried to isolate, proving the hidden why of the Ark's disappearance was the rescue of our biology through the fragmentation of our pride. I feel this narrative pulse calm down, perceiving the tremor scars in your soul are in truth the fertile soil for a new identity needing no external relics to be noticed by the Creator. Christian psychology applied to the closing of this cycle teaches your current collapse is not an event of blind fury, but the manifestation of a healing deciding your ego's rubble could no longer suffocate your practical hope's seed. The mystery binding us to the Ark is not the lost technique of its construction, but the discovery your emotional void is the exact coordinate where respect meets glory, transforming your taste of ashes into a new palette for simplicity and truth. I realize the central thesis of this journey is that you, like the priest trembling before the veil, are the heir to a hunger only satisfied when you decide the sacred deserves your silence, your time, and your limit. The lesson is that the engineering of a new beginning demands the courage to admit some structures need to be completely washed, so your life's soil becomes pure and habitable again. You are not defined by projects crumbling while trying to hold glory with hands, but by the light now emanating from you in accepting God's grace is the only ark your spirit truly needs to flourish. Has this journey brought some alento to the atmospheric pressure you've been feeling in your current environment, revealing your void is just the space being prepared for the real presence? If this script of spiritual autopsy and resilience spoke to your heart, share this video with someone you know is struggling to maintain sanity and rebuild life amidst the earth-cracking noise of modern chaos. I invite you to join us on this journey of healing by clicking the subscribe button and activating the bell to allow the Bible to continue teaching your soul to transform blocks into horizons of hope. Leave in the comments which lesson from the Ark's mystery or the psychology of respect most resonated with your pain today, and seal this moment of commitment by writing simply, "Rescuing Respect." Remember always, you may be facing ruins now, but your new name and your crown are being forged in the silence of every decision you make, not to allow the world's pride to define your heart's rhythm. I am the Bible teaches, and we will meet in the next whisper, resting in the certainty that the peace, exceeding all understanding, will guard your spirit as you walk beyond the borders of your own exhaustion.